dice. You never know if it could change your life. Take a chance, you're neither wrong or right. You never know if you don't roll them dice. You better roll them dice. You never know if it could change your life.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Dungeon Master of None. I'm Dungeon Master Rob. It's just me today, but I have a special guest on with me. Hello, Steve.
Hey everyone. Yeah, I'm Steve. Thank you, Rob. Thanks so much for having me here. I'm so excited to be here. I've been buzzing about this all week.
Good. I have too. I'm really excited about this. Like I said to you and our listeners, our real DM of None heads will know, we had Daniel Kwan on for a really good conversation last year, and you two are both on the Asians Represent podcast, and you streamed together, and he mentioned that you'd be a good person to talk to, and so finally I've managed to make this happen. I have a ton of questions for you, but for people who are not familiar with you, why don't you give your sort of like 10,000 foot view? What are you about? What's your deal?
Oh, I don't know if I could speak about myself. That just seems so out there. But hey everyone, my name's Steve. No, like Rob was saying, I am part of the Asians Represent crew, which is a podcast where we talk about Asian representation across all forms of media, especially in the gaming sphere. Daniel and I have streamed together for about, I think, 2 years now, going on 3, where, you know, we were picking each other's brains at a convention, and we just like really dug the energy. And eventually he asked me to come on for 1 or 2 episodes. Eventually asked me to come on as part of an actual play where we kind of rejigged D&D 5e. And then now I'm one of the co-hosts, and, you know, we've been working really hard to make sure that we're doing really impactful interviews, really touching on topics that I think are really important, and, you know, really leaning into the difficulty of having some of these conversations when it comes to equity, diversity, and inclusion.
Yeah, and you have had those conversations. You've done a lot, and I couldn't cover it all, but one of the really terrific things that you have been doing is you've been going through a lot of the older D&D books, especially the ones about Karatur, and those are for me fascinating to listen to, and really informative, entertaining, interesting conversations. I recommend them to everybody. That's, you know, you don't have to it's pretty hard to not notice what's wrong with them at this point in time, but having the deep dive that y'all do is really helpful and informative.
Yeah, I think so the first series that we did together was Asians Read Oriental Adventures. It was the old A&D model, right. Oriental Adventures. That one was really interesting because it was kind of, Daniel and I, we got together and was like, hey, let's just do it. Like, let's just read it online, and whatever happens, but we're going to be honest and vulnerable and kind of go through the motions. And if you go back and watch them, the first couple episodes are really interesting because we are both so frustrated and angry, and it really comes through. And, you know, from a professional / production standpoint, maybe not the best kind of content, but I look back on it and I'm really proud of it because we did something pretty brave, in my opinion. And we definitely tried to be as honest as possible. And as the series went on, you know, we had some, you know, one-on-ones where we talked about what do we really want to do and what do we want the audience to walk away with. And that was a tough conversation because there was a lot of things we could have done, but we wrote it all down. We kind of scoped it down. We're like, these are the things we want to talk about. Here are the things and points we want to reiterate each episode. And then it really kind of found its legs. And that was great because it gave us a lot of the experience needed to go into other directions, like the Karatur read that you were talking about, as well as another series we did where it was Asians Read Legend of the Five Rings. So just a really great experience to just, you know, I talk a lot about on Asians Represent growth, and, you know, how sometimes you have to kind of screw up to really kind of get your footing, and you have to find people that you really love and respect to have that space. And with the Asians Represent crew, they definitely gave me that space, and I definitely did screw up a couple of times, but it was all in a direction of growth, which was great.
I'm glad you brought that up because I was thinking of the Oriental Adventures read, and I remember being, I don't think it was that rough, by the way, but I do remember being very vulnerable and kind of raw. I do, and your frustration absolutely came through because it's a very frustrating adventure. You know, it really does not hold up, and it has a lot of like very uncomfortable cultural stereotypes and outright racism, to be quite honest. And that was I thought was very, it was bold of you and brave and kind of adventurous for you to put yourselves out there like that. So I'm a big fan of the pod in general, and I appreciate that. I think that's very valuable in this space when often people are more manufactured and less willing to be especially emotionally vulnerable.
I love that. Also, if you want to spend the next 50 minutes just stroking my ego, that is also a totally great direction for this podcast because, hey, what do you know?
This is what we do. This is what we do. We bring people on and we say nice things about them. I am a fan, though, and Matt and I are both historians or historians by training, and so we think a lot about world building, and we think a lot about how all cultures are represented, but especially because they're so often so poorly represented, non-white ones. And so coming across what you guys do and how well you do it was a delight for both of us. I'm going to step back a bit, or I'm going to roll this back a little bit because I got too excited to talk about a thing, and I have a whole list of questions. And the purpose of this podcast, theoretically, is to provide advice, information, context for people who want to DM or GM or are currently doing it and need ideas and inspiration. So one of the things that I love to ask, to just find out about people, and I'm always curious, is how you got into doing this, both just like the hobby, TTRPGs, D&D gaming, but also how you ended up being a creator, streamer, podcaster. What was your journey to where we are?
Yeah, absolutely. I share the story every once in a while, but I kind of hesitate about it because it's actually kind of embarrassing for me, but I will talk about it. I think everybody's
TTRPG like entry story is embarrassing. I don't think I've ever heard one that isn't like a little, but I'm excited to hear yours.
All right. You tell me on a scale of 1 to 10 after I'm done, how much of a cringe factor I got here.
Okay.
But
I'm very excited.
I started Dungeons & Dragons back in high school, like 14, 15 years old. So I was cutting my teeth on 3.5, though I had done some readings of AD&D as well. Not really sure where I was going to go, but hey, 3.5 was the most accessible at the time, and we got to just like get a group together, get the books, start playing. So I just started with a group of friends. My very first character was very explicitly a white man with blonde hair and blue eyes, and I remember, and this is the embarrassing part, I remember constantly saying that I was playing an Aryan man, and I thought very specifically that's how you had to play a paladin. So I'm like, I'm an Aryan paladin.
That makes sense. I can see that.
And that, like, looking back on it, I'm like, ooh, Steve, you had to unpack that. But of course, at the time, I didn't have the tools to do that. And I kept playing through Dungeons & Dragons, and I had a blast with it. I thought it was great. I got to do what paladins do, and I smote a whole bunch of evil creatures, didn't ask too many questions, and just kept playing. And eventually, I kind of transitioned to the DM seat where I'm like, hey, this seemed like a lot of fun. Do you mind if I give it a try to be a DM? And there was stumbling, and there was challenges and hurdles and all that good stuff, but I kept with it. Kept with the additions, kept working at it, kept writing, kept designing. And what I really liked about it was that it kind of opened up the world of board games to me, as well as the world of video game and level design. So I dabbled a bit in there. As that went on, and as I made connections that way, I started talking more into certain conversations that maybe I wasn't super comfortable with, but I came to it with a lot of, hearts, both my ears open, that kind of stuff. And eventually, as I kept putting myself out there and talking to people and trying to make connections, eventually I got an opportunity to start writing D&D content. So it was only 2 years ago that I first got published as a D&D writer for the Unbreakable Volume 1 series, where I wrote my own D&D 5e adventure. And it got published, and I was like, holy crap, that's my name. And that was wild.
That's super cool. I would say, by the way, that's medium cringe at best.
Medium? Okay.
It's honestly, it's kind of, I'm trying to think of, I'm certain that I made far worse blunders when I was starting to be both a player and a DM, but I can see where you were coming from. So could be much cringier. I've had a lot, I DM for a lot of first time players, and most of the time they're a delight. Every now and then they'll come to the table with some truly wild ideas of what appropriate behavior is. And so that's my context for medium cringe. I think it could be a lot worse.
Gotcha.
So that's really cool. I ending up as a writer, world builder, DM, jack of all trades, I can see that feels like a pretty natural path for somebody who's really enthusiastic about the systems and about the game. One of the things that is less so that I'm interested in, and that I think a lot of our listeners are interested in, that Matt and I don't have a lot of context in, is doing actual plays or doing live play in general. And that's always been very interesting to me. We do not or have not, and we're always interested to talk to actual players or people who stream their games in any way, shape, or form. So I'm curious how you got into that, and especially how you think it might be or is different from just generally playing D&D or GMing.
I think it's definitely a different experience. I think the most successful actual plays, they treat it like a different beast than, your typical home game. And I think that's very wise on their part. For me personally, my first actual play was with Daniel and the Asian Represent crew on Dungeons and Asians. We had a lot of conversations outside of the game before it even started, even before we had session 0, talking about production, goals, what we really want the actual play to be. And then we talked about how we wanted the episodes to flow, what they would kind of feel like, and what the, user experience would be. And that's not a conversation you have at a home game. You never talk about like what the audience is going to experience. But for an actual play, you do, or you should. And that's a very interesting, and for me, an enjoyable conversation to have, because every actual play that you're going to be part of, there's going to be different goals and endpoints that you're looking for. So the way we play Dungeons and Dragons or Dungeons and Asians is different than if I was doing like a charity stream for a specific kind of charity. Or, I'm just doing something as part of, I don't know, maybe a paid opportunity, and we're looking just to make it as entertaining as possible, or to showcase, a new supplement or something like that. So the goal really dictates how I approach the actual play. And I know that sounds super boring, but it is...
Actually doesn't, yeah.
Okay, well, it's very challenging, and I like it a lot, because typically when you join on to like an actual play group, everyone's kind of on board to have these conversations. So you already have that baseline to just connect on that. And now once you're a bunch of creatives and you're sitting down and you're thinking, okay, how do we want to approach this? Fireworks go off. And you start having like those connection moments, like those aha moments. And that's something you don't typically get at a typical home game, which is great.
That is great. If you don't mind, actually, I was really interested in what you said about the upfront conversations about production, user experience, that sort of thing. I'd love to hear more about that process and like how you approach that, because I agree. I can tell the difference between a actual play that has considered how it is going to like be received, how it's going to be treating it like a production or a performance rather than just we're sitting down and streaming. What was your thought process or just process in general around that?
Yeah, so some of the behind the scenes stuff here for Dungeons and Asians.
You don't have to give away any secrets. I'm curious generally about.
Well, we use this amazingly secretive thing called OneNote or Google Docs, and we share notes to each other, and we review them before we record. So, being more specific, we actually have a quick little checklist of how we want to kick off our episodes, and then for each episode, we kind of bookend it. We kind of know where we need to end and where we're going to start. And we also know that we need to record for about 90 minutes, and we don't want to go too much further over that. So with that in mind, we kind of jam before the session starts. Sometimes we might have a meal or something like that, depending on the timing. And we sit together and we talk about it. And then we figure out what those bookends might be. We talk about if there's any like high level goals we think our characters might be going for, and if it fits. And if it doesn't fit, where might we fit it in later on? And we just write all these things down. And then once we feel comfortable, we feel good, and we feel like we're all on the same page, we hit that, record button, and we just kind of go for it.
I've actually not asked this question of too many people, and I'm super impressed. That's how I would approach it. That sounds like a really good way to get the energy up and get started and make sure that everybody's on the same page. It seems smart, and like you're approaching it like professionals, almost as if you are. That's wild. You kind of already answered this, but with all of that in mind, I guess for our listeners, if you had advice for starting an actual play or joining one or just participating in general, what would it be?
So this is a story from a con that I was with Daniel, And he had just finished recording an episode of Dungeons and Asians in a hallway. And that episode is one of my favorites because everyone's audio is like crisp and great. And his is just like grainy and garbled and you can't hear anything he's saying. And it's really, really funny because the episode starts with him just apologizing to the listener. He's just like, I'm so sorry. But my two guests are so amazing, and the content they were giving and the design aspect of it was so valuable that I can't not publish it. So I apologize for your ears, but I hope you enjoy the parts that you can make out. And I hope it's overall a positive experience. That con, Daniel was having kind of like a quick, be cool and be chill in the hallway. And someone came up and recognized him and was like, I'm thinking of running an actual play. What advice do you have? Or they were talking about an actual play they were planning and they were looking for Daniel to obviously give some feedback. And I will never forget because Daniel was like, stopped him mid-sentence almost and was like, okay, you're obviously very passionate about this, but what is the hook? So what? You want to start an actual play? Cool. Yeah, I'm sure you're great people and very entertaining, but what's a differentiator? What's the thing that makes you unique? And the person kind of gave like a pretty generic answer. It was kind of like, oh, we'd be really entertaining and the world is really unique. And Daniel said to them, yeah, everyone's world is unique, but like that's not enough. What do you bring that's going to be so much cooler than everyone else? And it was, I'm not going to say it was aggressive, but it was like very assertive. And it was exactly what that person needed. And they had a back and forth. And after about 10 minutes, 15 minutes of pretty intense conversation, they walked away with an idea or like the beginning of an idea that they were feeling pretty confident in. And Daniel was like, yeah, that's a thing I've never heard before. So run with it for a little bit, see where it goes. Maybe you have to, give up the ghost on this one. But at the very least, this is a good place to start, in my opinion. So long-winded way to say, when you want to make an actual play, you got to ask yourself the really hard question, so what?
That's really good advice. And I think we've gotten similar advice. I think it's good advice for anything that you're creating, right? You have to have an elevator pitch. You have to be able to say, why should I read or watch or listen to this over something else that's similar? It's great that you brought this up because I have not yet had a chance to watch it, and I think it ended. But recently you were on a actual play that was, if I understand correctly, the pitch was it's a Feywild Western. Is that right? Which, like, by itself, that's a great hook. I'm already like, I get it. I'm on board. This is different. I'm going to check this out.
Yeah, that one was really, really interesting because I actually felt the pitch wasn't super, super strong. And I shared that. I was like, hey, this is like a pretty good pitch. I think our cast is amazing. I'm not really feeling a really good so what coming out of this like meeting. And then we talked about it. And you know what? The value that we got out of it from the experience of producing and going through the motions and building up each other as coworkers and friends we really, really trust. That was incredibly valuable. So although the so what, in my opinion, wasn't amazingly strong, it's not a huge differentiator, I think the energy and the learnings that we got from it made it super, super valuable. We talked about kind of like processes and things like that. What better way to test out your process than actually putting in front of the people and seeing what happens? And there were holes in it for sure. And we figured out how we would plug those, and we figured out new processes. And it was a great experience. I cannot wait for my next opportunity to work with any of those folks again.
That's actually really interesting, and also good advice in my opinion. I think that clearly that hit a spot for me. I love Westerns in all their forms, and so I'm like, great. You put one twist on a Western, I'm there. A space Western, fairy Western. It's a space Western with synthwave music. I'm there. I also think that it was really that what you said about it just being worthwhile to do, the experience and learning from it being valuable. I always try to tell people just to go for it. There's value in doing something even if it's not going to crack the foundations of the earth. So that's really cool to hear that you still got a lot out of that.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And we had those meetings and those debriefs and things like that, and they were super, super talented, and I can't wait to take all that experience and use that to hone our talent into a laser that's gonna break the earth and cut right through. It's gonna be amazing. I'm
excited to see. So this brings me to sort of my next question, which is about GMing and DMing in general. And this can be about whether you're doing an actual play or just as in your home games or whatever. But you said that you started as a player and then you moved to being the DM. And like I said, most of our listeners are DMs or GMs or interested in being one. And so like, what do you like about it? What's your approach to it? What do you not like about it? Are you a forever DM? You know, are you stuck in the heavy as the head that wears the crown, stuck in the throne all the time, having to administer justice no matter what?
It's really interesting because my feelings on that question change like hourly.
I feel that.
I think right now, right this second as we record this, I think I have a pretty chill attitude when it comes to GMing and playing and things like that. I kind of see it as a broader idea of experiencing gaming, or tabletop gaming. When it comes to DMing Dungeons & Dragons specifically, I'm very kind of playing off the players. I don't plan too far ahead. I try to write down a couple of themes here and there. But I also kick off my games with a little bit of collaborative world building with the players. I want to know where their heads are at. I want to know what kind of stuff that they're not interested in. And I just keep kind of, vibing off their energy. And that kind of goes into one of my now foundational parts of my DM experience, which is I have a feedback system we use every single game. So it's not an ask for me. It's more of just something we do every single game where we sit down and we go through these processes of talking about the game and how the experience was. And I write them all down and I store them in a journal. And it's kind of cool because I keep it on the cloud now for my online players, and my players can go back and they'd be like, wow, we're on session like 108. This is great.
That's really interesting. Do you do that feedback at the end of the game or at the beginning or in between sessions?
So my checklist, as it were, is I go through every game. We start off, we chill for a little bit, we catch up because, we oftentimes only get time to hang out with each other at these games. We hang out, we catch up. Once everyone's energy is like at that good level to start kicking off the game, we go through our safety tools, all of them in one go. We make sure we review them and we make additions if we need to. Once everyone's cool there, we give a recap. Recap is up in the air for anyone to do it. I have no problem doing it, but oftentimes players will do it as well. Or sometimes I'll be like, I'm tired today. Can someone else do a recap? And someone else will jump in. So that's great. We play, and then at the end of it, depending on the group, I will deploy or use a different way of gathering feedback. So in Dungeons and Asians, Daniel uses stars and wishes. So stars go to players where you kind of give them a kudos, like you give them a gold star. And then a wish is a wish that you wish would happen next session with no promises that it would happen. And I'm like, that's a really elegant way to get feedback because it kind of takes the idea that criticism has to be negative. A wish is very clearly a positive thing, but you get the exact same information out of it. And people are a lot more willing to do it.
Steve, this is really smart. This is really good advice. Honestly, I'm like really impressed. This is. I tend to be pretty. I do a lot of note taking and I do a lot of. I solicit a lot of feedback, but this is structured in a way that I find very, very appealing. I'm stealing this like wholesale. I love this. This provides guardrails in a way that I hadn't considered before. This is really cool.
Yeah, I think the key for me is structure. Right. And as boring as it might sound for some folks, having that structure in there is kind of nice because, there's no onus on a player or other participant to just make criticism out of like a whole cloth. The system is there. I'm very specifically asking you, please give a star out to another player for a thing they did in the game that was really amazing. And that's great. And then a wish, what do you wish would happen next session? That's also a very specific ask. And it takes off a lot of that heat for criticism because we're all friends around the table. No one wants to criticize each other. So instead, let's spin it and let's all do it together and we'll support each other.
That's really cool. Some other systems, my experience with this is actually mostly with Burning Wheel. Burning Wheel has this formalized in the game. At the end of every session, you sit down and there's a checklist of basically this, like who role played well, what did you get out of the session? Like, what are you trying to accomplish next time? That system has all kinds of, it's a beautiful disaster. So that's not exactly a great thing to adopt wholesale, but I loved the formalized feedback at the end, and I like this idea of stars and wishes. That's simple and elegant. That's a really good idea, and I think it's a great way to get easy, simple feedback from people. That's not, like you said, doesn't feel like criticism.
Absolutely. And there's a lot of other systems as well that you can use for feedback since we're talking about it. So I had another game where we transitioned to be online, and I knew there was going to be a lot of technology hurdles for a lot of the players based on kind of their experience and whatnot. So instead I did a roses, thorns, and wishes. So roses are the same as stars, but I wanted to put in thorn in there specifically because I wanted to hear what was painful. Like today, where did you experience pain? And this was because I knew a lot of the pain would be technology. I also knew there'd be a lot of pain around character creation and character abilities in D&D 5e. So I specifically created now this pathway to be like, you know what? I don't know how my spells work, and I'm feeling pain around this. And I'll be like, great, write that down. And then after this game is over and we have like a chance to get some sleep or like, chill, I'll approach you later on the week and we'll figure out how we can, address that pain.
That's great. It's a really good idea. And that specific scenario is one that I have experienced many times. The pain around switching a in-person game online or vice versa, or going back and forth, given that it's a pandemic. I feel like I've done it 5 times in either direction in the past couple of years. So, that's
80% of our games, the thorns are just thorning the pandemic, and that's totally fine. Sometimes it's just nice to vent that.
Yeah, that is nice. That's a good outlet. So you clearly have your own groups of friends. You get along well. You have a good rapport. You've already mentioned that you do also attend cons sometimes. Do you play games at cons? Do you run games at cons?
So, personally for me, I go to cons to enjoy as many beverages of a refreshing nature as possible and to just socially network with people. By which I mean I run around cons in cosplay, doing what I'm going to do, and I typically don't have time for games, which is a huge, huge shame. But I will say that when I go to cons, the games I always seek out, the ones that I like immediately through the book and like try to find the games, are LARPs. 100% they're LARPs. I don't get a lot of opportunities to do LARPs in my home games and things like that. The logistics is just really, really hard. But I find in a convention, I'm wearing something silly already, so who cares? I show up, hear all these strangers, I'm given a scenario, and now I'm like in my body, also watching other people, sometimes watching myself from like my mind's eye, and I'm navigating this new situation and I get to do it physically. That is a dope experience. That's amazing.
That's a great answer. And there's no shame. I'm only curious. Matt and I both run, it's been years now since I've been to a con, obviously, but used to run games at cons, and it's another thing that we get a lot of questions about. So I'm always curious. Frankly, these days I agree with your approach. If and when I ever get to go back to a con, all I really want to do is have some refreshing beverages and talk to people and network and meet cool people in the space. But I also 100% agree with you that LARPing is a totally unique experience, and it can be goofy, but it can also be a lot of fun. And I don't think that there's really a better venue for it than a convention. I think it's also pretty hard to set up outside of that unless you have a lot of time and structure and resources. So I 100% agree with that approach. What's your favorite LARP that you've been a part of?
There's been so many. Okay. I really, really like small LARPs, like mini LARPs, of like, Monster Summit, where it's kind of almost like a summer camp game where you all pretend to be monsters at a summit, and like one of you represents the goblins and one of you represents the kobolds and one of you represents like the elves and the humans, and you all get like a secret card that says what your goal is at this summit. And then we just sit there and we argue until finally either war is declared or we somehow come to a compromise for everyone. That's a great LARP. That takes like 15 minutes. It's great. There's other LARPs where... Amazing.
That sounds like a ton of fun.
Oh my God, it's great. And then you just like pull this out of your back pocket. You're like, hey, we're doing a LARP now. Everyone, gather around this table. That's really, really fun. There's other LARPs as well, such as Caught in a Bear Trap. Caught in a Bear Trap is a really fun one because everyone's kind of, you're told the setting. Typically, you're like in a bunker or like an abandoned, I don't know, hospital or something like that. So like you already have like some spook vibes. And then the facilitator eventually just finds someone and just whispers in the ear, "You've stepped in a bear trap, fall down, you're dying." and then all of a sudden chaos ensues. It's like that twist. And all of a sudden everyone has to like figure out what to do and how to get out of here and things like that. Really, really fun. But the most fun LARP that I've had thus far is a friend of mine who does game design. She created this Shadowrun LARP based on rock, paper, scissors. That was our adversarial. And the idea was that we would naturally try to make a team of runners to sabotage the other team of runners while slowly gathering points. And the first one to get like 10 points through various means could then go to our job person. What are they called? Mr.
Fixer,
Black?
Not Fixer.
Fixers.
Mr. Johnson. Sorry, that's right.
Yeah, Yeah. So we would sneakily come up to him and be like, "I have 10 points and here's my proof." And then if that happens, you win and you get access to like a whole bunch of treasure and things like that. Super, super fun. In that particular LARP, my team won. I had sabotaged a whole bunch of other people. I had burned so many bridges. And at the end of it, Mr. Johnson was like, "Take this Nerf gun and kill all the other runners in this room." So I was like, I don't do firearms. I'm just like the face here. So I gave it to someone else and they immediately took the gun and shot me and killed me.
Incredible. Very
It's
Shadowrun.
Like so good. So Shadowrun, and just like I didn't see it coming, and when it happened, I had like this out of body experience where I'm like, this was the greatest game I've ever played.
God, that's incredible. It sounds like a ton of fun. I want to ask you about your game writing, your game design, your homebrew. You already mentioned that you started doing your own stuff, and then you were networking and you ended up writing an adventure. Do you mind breaking down a bit more like how you came to that? Tell us a little bit about the adventure and what you were trying to accomplish and what, your experience was with that.
Yeah, absolutely. So the Unbreakable Volume, which I wrote for, it was very much Asian writers writing about their experiences. It was going to be illustrated by all Asian artists and things like that. So we had this Pan-Asian team where we're all going to individually write the things that meant the most to us. I remember I was talking to some other folks, and a lot of people were doing like a take on mythology and things like that. And because of my diaspora and my specific way that I engage with my Vietnamese culture, I don't really know a lot of myths, which is tragic, but it's kind of the way it is. And apparently it's not that unique for a lot of Vietnamese diaspora. But what I do know are kind of the things that happened recently. Like Vietnam War kind of defined a whole lot of my upbringing and things like that. So I wrote a adventure that was about, it was couched in my experiences climbing a mountain, going to a temple. That was a really cool experience when I was a teenager and I finally got to visit Vietnam. Because I remember I hated it. It was awful. It was incredibly painful. It's 100% humidity. I'm climbing a mountain. It's covered in jungle. I'm sweating. I can't breathe. And then I finally got to the top and I got to see this temple. And this temple was breathtaking. All of a sudden, it was worth it. All of that pain I felt and all of the sweat that's in my eyes and like it's stinging me, totally worth it. Walked through the temple. All of a sudden, I could feel myself like relaxing, and I could feel things that I really couldn't feel unless I had gone through that entire journey. So I was like, I gotta write something about this. I gotta do something about this. So I decided to do kind of like a linear dungeon crawl where you kind of go through room 1, room 2, room 3, and it's about kind of going through a temple, and it's about basically taking a lot of damage and watching other people take a bunch of damage. But at the end of it, it's all really necessary to, bring peace back to this temple. Really, really fun. And apparently a lot of what I got some feedback on this, what people really liked was that the temple is full of monks, like D&D 5e monks, and they're all like generic NPC monks, but there's a table at the end where I gave them all names, and then I just gave them different weapons. So like none of them fight with fists. One of them fights with like a giant sword. Another one fights with, I think, a spike and chain, that kind of stuff. Just random weapons. I'm like, these are cool weapons. Monks don't just use fists. Here you go. They all have cool stuff. And then they also have like a little blurb on the personality. There's stuff like, this person is a a war vet, and they are a pacifist. They no longer want to fight. They are not interested in it. They're here for whatever. This monk is a little kid. They're like right on that cusp of coming of age, and they are just angry at the world, and they are always pissed, and they always are seeking a fight. And then there's all these things in between. And apparently people thought that was really cool that I just listed out in a table, it's not that many words, different ways to play monks.
I think that's really, really interesting. I also like monks with weird, cool, dangerous weapons. That's
oh yeah.
There's so many cool weapons. There's so many weapons that you can give to martial artists for them to fight with. It's incredible. So much variety there. This was in the Unbreakable collection, you said?
Yeah. So Unbreakable is an anthology of a whole bunch of D&D 5e one-shot adventures. So, the various writers all kind of wrote to their strengths and things that they were really passionate about. So mine was obviously couched in my Vietnamese diaspora experience. I believe there was one other writer, Kevin Nguyen, who wrote to his Vietnamese experience as well. But then there were also writers from Cambodia, a lot of Chinese writing as well. And there are a couple other ones I feel more kind of Pan-Asian. And that is because that particular writer is mixed Asian. And they have a lot of influences that, affected them growing up. And those are really, really cool too.
This is a good time for me to get to my next question, which is about Asians Represent specifically, but also about what that podcast is about. We talked about this a little bit, but it is very clear to me what the value and intent of that podcast is, and I find it incredibly valuable. But I'm what inspired you, or what was your motivation to start doing Asians Represent and start streaming and start speaking to that need? And what are your goals there? What are you trying to accomplish? And
yeah, so maybe I'll start with saying that, for Asians Represent, I started as a listener. And what ended up happening was I was talking to a good friend of mine, and I was frustrated about something in Dungeons and Dragons. I don't remember what it was. And she was like, that frustration you have, I think I've heard it before. Have you heard this podcast, Asians Represent? And I was like, no. And then I checked them out, and I started listening to the crew just talk through these things in a very calm, collected, but also vulnerable and emotional way was really eye-opening for me. And now that I've been part of it, I also get those messages and emails from folks where they're like, I really appreciate the words you said, because it started clicking and I started making connections. And I realized that, I don't have to try to figure out and untangle this knot all by myself. I can reach out to other people and we can have conversations, and I can try to navigate my way through the systems, the barriers, the challenges. So when it comes to me in Asians Represent, what I'm really looking to do is take my positive experience as a listener, my positive experience as someone who takes these conversations and extends them, first as a guest and then eventually as a co-host, and try to make that experience and that growth path as accessible as possible. So oftentimes, while we're recording, I'll pause the conversation. I'll be like, you know what? I'm not super understanding this. Here's where I'm at right now. Can I make a connection this way? And then the hosts and the guests, we can have that conversation. We can build those connections. And apparently that has been really helpful for certain listeners to make them build their own connections and decide how they want to grow and what they would need in order to facilitate that growth.
That's really cool. I don't want to put you on the spot, but I'm wondering if you don't mind giving an example of, trying to make that connection in a way that's valuable to you, in a way that, you're trying to seek greater understanding. Because I'm pretty sure I know what you mean, but I'm curious if you have an example.
Yeah. So some of the most emotional messages I got was late last year when I did the first Vietnamese voices episode. So I brought on 4 Vietnamese voices, and we sat down, we talked about being Vietnamese in the tabletop RPG space, both in terms of, being part of an AP, what it means to actually show, your face and role play as a Vietnamese coded character to various audiences, what it means to design games centered around your experiences and the difficulties you have around it. And as we were having that conversation, we naturally just kind of picked and prodded at certain areas where obviously we had some trauma that we were trying to heal over, whether we knew it or not. And as that was happening and we were building those connections, I got a lot of messages and feedback where people were like, when you told that story about, you know, you came to this character, this is how you name them, the names come from these people who influenced us, I really, really felt that. And when you talked about, one of the stories I told was how I defined a lot of my childhood growing up through anger and violence, because of how often I was associated with war, the Vietnam War, and how I tried to really lean into violence and anger and how it just didn't fit me, but I thought I kind of had to. And I got messages being like, that was a path I took, and it was really, really hard to navigate it. I'm really happy you said it because I wasn't 100% out of the woods yet, but this kind of gave me the push I needed to continue seeking a new path that fits me. So that was pretty mind-blowing for me.
I already told you how much I was impressed by this, so I'll try not to gush too much, but I do think that it's very impressive, you know, your willingness to be vulnerable, to show and have emotions. I have talked about this on this podcast a couple of times. It is not easy for anybody. It's not easy for nerds. It's not easy for men. And I can't speak to the Asian experience or to the diaspora experience, but even above and beyond that, it's I think that it's critically important. And so I think that's really, really cool. I feel like it's becoming more and more acceptable. And so, you know, I don't have to necessarily gush about it, but you and Daniel both were very comfortable talking about this. And so I'm just very impressed. And I think that's super important to this hobby space, especially, which has so much toxicity around all sorts of things, but often around being sensitive in general or being vulnerable to anything. No, I totally agree. And it's I think we're getting to a place, and the conversation is progressing to a place where we're ready to start having those conversations. But I do think that we lack kind of the guideposts and the other voices to help us navigate that space, because that space is naturally entrenched in a lot of pain. And that pain can come from a lot of different places, such as, like I mentioned, violence, but it can come from sadness. It can come from rejection and isolation and all these things that are really, really hard to navigate and handle and even talk to. Some people even lack the words to describe it. So I do feel positive and optimistic, because I think your work, the work that a lot of people do, it helps to push the conversation in that direction. And I hope that as I continue this work with Asians Represent, I can be one of those voices that helps to guide specifically people who are masculine presenting, who are Asian, and I can speak to my experiences and how I'm trying to navigate it and trying to build them up that way. I think that this is, I agree completely. I think this is especially important. And that you and I, Steve, are both strong men. And this is something I've been looking forward to talking to you about for a while. Those of you who are listening, please go to Steve's Twitter and take a look. He's a very fine, muscular man. And, you do, I think you mentioned that you did Olympic lifting or lifting in general. And I personally delight in being a, broad-shouldered, muscular man who is unafraid to talk about these sorts of things. And I think that it's increasingly important to show that I think masculinity is not incompatible with, you don't even have to be terribly sensitive. You just, be willing to talk just a little bit and just be vulnerable. Folks, it's not that hard. This is like one of the drums that I'm constantly banging, not on this podcast as much as I should, but so I always get super amped in these conversations because I don't think that it is that, I think it's so valuable, right? I think that it's so liberating for men. It has been for me. And I get so excited. I always like to see it. You mentioned that you did cosplay, and I do not, and Matt and I do not, but I'm super interested in this, and I'm really curious about this part of your, going to cons and your performance. You dress up, you have costumes. Like when Was that something that you started doing at the same time as coming into the TTRPG space, or was that separate? It's all part of the same glorious nerdy trajectory.
I never really thought about the timeline, but I guess it kind of goes. I was a teenager. I was entrenched in tabletop RPGs, D&D specifically. I got into fitness a couple years after that, and I got really passionate about lifting and eating really 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 good food. And then I moved into cosplay, and it's so weird that you ask that, because at this point in time in my life, I just see all these things and they just kind of like all blur and meld into a really nice idea of how I see myself. So thank you for that question, because I had never really thought about it. But yeah, I started cosplay. I guess it's one of my more recent hobbies. My most recent one is pickling things. But no, it's been a fairly recent hobby. I've been doing it for like, I think 15 years now. And I'm by no means a professional cosplayer. I'm not seeking out that kind of level of recognition. Nor am I super passionate about the actual crafting side of things, though I do enjoy it, obviously. I just like putting on costumes and showing up and just hanging out in them. I think it's great and it's fun.
It is great and it is fun. And I mean, I've been thinking about this a lot. I should start getting in. Calling it cosplay would be a stretch, but I did used to go to cons and to events in costume, and I really should start doing it again. Because it is just a lot of fun.
I'm going to interrupt you here. Why don't you consider it cosplay?
Well, because I was basically repurposing Halloween costumes, a flowy shirt and leather pants to go to the Ren Fair. But you know what, Steve? Maybe you're right. Maybe I should be considering it cosplay. But at the time, I'll tell you, sorry, I have a better answer for this. And the reason is that at the time, I wasn't really familiar with cosplay as a concept. So I was just dressing up to go to the Ren Fair. I was just putting on a Jedi robe to attend a con. This was probably a decade ago. So I suppose probably was cosplay. I just didn't think of it as such because I didn't have the vocabulary.
Yeah, for sure. And I think if you feel the label cosplay doesn't fit you, or cosplay doesn't fit you, that's dope. That's fine. But if you do feel like you would like that as part of who you are and you would like to wear that label for a little bit, nothing stops you, I don't think. I think it is absolutely valid to put on a pre-bought costume, a Jedi costume, whatever it is, get it off the shelf, get a Halloween costume. Have you seen how good Halloween costumes are these days? I have.
They're getting really good. Yeah, they're really solid.
So if you get a really cool Halloween costume and you wear it and it feels great on you and you love wearing it and you want to be a cosplayer, just call yourself a cosplayer. And, earlier to your points about kind of breaking down these walls and talking about how we approach these things, maybe this is a good time for you to think about how these labels, how you've internalized labels, how you want to grow with these labels and what that might look like. You're talking about my cosplay room. I'm in a closet right now.
It's a really cool closet, folks. It's very cool.
Thank you. So it's full of a whole bunch of cosplay stuff that has just been gathering up over, decade plus. And I would say about a quarter of these are just pre-bought costumes that I then tailored and made sure that they fit well or added accessories and things like that. And that's super valuable for me, and I love it.
That's really cool. And I do think this wasn't my intent, but since you made a point of it, I do think that there is a little stigma around cosplay, which is maybe I was somehow internalized, which I didn't intend, because I don't think there's anything that actively, consciously don't think there's anything wrong with it. And I think it's actually extremely cool. So that is something that I should probably think about.
It's also possible that maybe it's the other way, where you kind of felt like, oh, it's a pedestal. Like I couldn't possibly be a cosplayer because it came off the shelf. And that is an interesting way to approach a hobby, because if I had said that, oh, I'm not a D&Der, I only play online, you'd be like, what the hell are you talking about? What is that? Where's that coming from?
Steve, that's very wise. I really appreciate your perspective on this. I do want to ask you, so like I said, I work out a lot. I used to be a competitive athlete. I was a swimmer, and then I played rugby. And now I do a number of things, but I lift weights. And this, to me, I have come to realize often triggers a lot of the same pathways of joy and satisfaction that a lot of my like nerd activities do. And I think that there's a real like connection for me in the I guess sort of measured progression of lifting weights. So I'm really curious about how you came to this and what your experience is and your approach to fitness is.
Yeah. So, again, tell me how cringy this is, but my fitness really started with reading maybe not the best blog posts about paleo diet and other things like that. So obviously,
that's also medium cringe, and I've been there. I've read some. Really,
okay.
I got some really bad advice, which I fortunately did not stick with. But yeah, no, I think that's a lot of people's fitness journey.
So I needed a change in my life. I started reading these blogs, and the advice was questionable at best, but it did kick me in the butt to start exploring the space, as it were. Start deconstructing how I looked at food, myself, my body, my performance, all that good stuff. So then I started going to the gym. I picked up a barbell, I put it on my back, and I started doing what I thought were full squats. They were not. And then I started doing, bench press. It was not. But I started kind of enjoying my time at the gym, and I felt good doing it. Sometimes, some days I felt like crap doing it, but I just kept at it. And then I started building more connections, and I started talking to people who are interested in it, and we began talking about it, and we began connecting those dots. And then I started, looking more into the things that I was really passionate about. So obviously I moved away from the paleo diet. I don't recommend that for anyone, but I do recommend taking a look at how your body reacts to certain foods, what your body needs to function day to day. And if something changes, how does that really affect your mood? I think journaling is really, really good, both in a diet sense, but also just a general wellness sense. So that's really, really cool. Sleep is a big part of that too. And then
Sleep is a big part of that. Yep.
Oh yeah. For folks out there, the priority should be sleep, eat, exercise. Just putting that out there.
Yeah, I know you know this. People wildly underestimate how much of a difference a good night's sleep makes, especially when it comes to recovering from exercise. I think this is it sounds dumb, and a lot of people have difficulty sleeping, so it's kind of a bummer. But it really, boy, it's night and day. You got to get good sleep.
Oh yeah, I once tried to go a month getting 12 hours of sleep a day. 12 hours. So like I set alarms and things like that. I planned this all out, and I learned after about 2.5 weeks, I hate it. It was terrible for my body. It was like doing horrible damage to me. But I did the experiment, and I journaled it, and I found out that, hey, this is actually how much sleep I need to feel good. And here's how much I need if I'm feeling not so great, and like my body is telling me I need more. So that was really, really great.
Yeah.
But yeah,
that's good advice. Sorry, this is really good advice. I was just like listening to something the other day. How much sleep your body needs, it varies from person to person, right? And so like the advice, 7-8 hours is good, but some people need more, some people need less. And your advice, journaling, really just like how do I feel on days when I get this much sleep, or how do I feel on days when I eat this or drink this much water? Like, I don't know. You want to catalog your whole life, and you don't want to end up, that can be kind of a disaster, but it's such a good idea, especially if you're trying to figure out, like, why do I feel like crap? To just, try to keep a journal and just try to write things down. Everyone should just try to find those good days, like when, what is working, what makes you feel good. And I think a lot of us are not given the opportunity to do so. Sorry, I went off on a tangent while you were talking about your fitness, sleep. Anyway,
no, that's continue. So good. No, that's so good, because I love that, because I can sing the praises of journaling so much, but it also sets you up for a lot of other good habits if that would resonate with you. So journaling your sleep, for example, builds a habit that you might evolve into journaling gratitude. And, for a lot of folks who have progressed through therapy or have done like a little introspection, maybe journaling gratitude is something you want to do and take forward in your life. And what better way than to start building other good habits and just feeling great about it.
I've got my bullet journal right here on my desk with me. It never leaves my side. It's a critical part of me being a functional human being at this point in time. So it's great advice.
I love that. My personal journaling method for gratitude and other things, this doesn't work for a lot of people, but I write them on Post-it notes. So I look at them and I write them down, and then I tear them up and I throw them away. They're compostable. All Post-it notes are compostable. I looked into that. And the act of just writing something down and then throwing it away, for me, I find very cathartic, and it's very meaningful to me. So that's my personal journaling way.
I like that. That's very nice, especially for something like gratitude. I think that's a really, I think that's kind of poetic. I like that. So what's your routine these days, Steve? What you just came from the gym? We both did. What were you doing on this fine Wednesday?
So if we weren't in pandemic, Thursdays are my Olympic lifting days. So today is Wednesday. So I would have probably been doing more free weights in terms of dumbbells and kettlebells, likely. Tuesdays would have been probably more like a cardio metabolic conditioning day. So the things I do really kind of vary, and I try my best to work with a coach. Today, for my workout, I was on a Zoom call with my coach and several other members of my gym. Unfortunately, we can't be together right now, and we haven't been able to for a long time. But I have my coach. My coach has worked with me for a very long time. He knows all my injuries, which is very important. And we kind of progress through there. And sometimes I want to give some feedback, like, hey, I feel like I shouldn't be doing this. What are your thoughts? Maybe I should do this, or maybe I'm just looking for like a suggestion on a whole cloth. But to actually answer your question, how do I work out now? I'm at home. My workouts are almost purely body weight. Push-ups. I happen to have a pull-up bar in my door jam, so that's been really, really nice. I do a lot of burpees because they're making me feel better these days compared to before, when I was doing a lot more lifting with barbells and just eating iron every day. But the burpees have been great. But to be honest, the thing that I've been really, really kind of passionate about is building my own workouts, given like a theme. And because we're on this podcast, my theme is Dungeons and Dragons subclasses. So I actually I'm not sharing this anywhere, not yet at least, but I have a spreadsheet of all the subclasses. And every day when I want to do a workout, I roll on it and I get a subclass, and I sit there and I think, how the heck am I going to do, I don't know, the Undying Warlock workout? What is that going to look like? And I sit there and I think about it, and it gets my brain engaged. And then I start getting excited about it because I start writing stuff down. And sometimes I'll throw it away. And other times I'll be like, yeah, this looks good. Roll out the mat and let's give it a try. And that's been my current fitness routine.
I had no idea this was coming, and I'm so glad to hear it. That's terrific. I'm lucky enough to have access to a weight set, so I can continue to lift barbells. I have one in my basement, but if I didn't, I imagine I would have to do something like that, because I get really bored with body weights very quickly, or body weight exercises. But that sounds like a great idea. Steve, will you share with me? You don't have to share with anybody else, but I would love to see one or two of these whenever you have one that you're particularly impressed by, because there's also a great idea to just keep things fresh, like how trying to imagine how, whatever particular subclass would translate to a workout. I love it.
Yeah. And you know what? I think what I really like about it is that oftentimes people think of exercise as like a routine. It's like, oh, today I'm doing arms. Today I'm doing chest or whatever. I don't really see fitness in that way anymore. I see fitness as more of like a flow of movement and just the overall maintenance and respect of your own body. Mm-hmm. So I will happily share this with you and we can talk about it. But there are some workouts in there that are just hard weightlifting. I'm like, here's your program, eat iron for half an hour. I had another one that was, it was for the Clockwork Sorcerer. I'm really proud of this one.
Ooh, okay.
It is 45 seconds of work, 15 seconds of rest for 34 minutes. And the idea is that you just look at a clock for half an hour and you never stop looking at it.
Oh, I like that. That makes sense. Yeah.
So that was really cool. The the one that was hardcore weightlifting was the assassin workout. So I'm sure you're aware of Widowmakers or corpse makers, right?
Yes, I am.
So it's
they used to make us do them in rugby, and I don't know. I think I threw up at least once during a Widowmaker.
Oh yeah, totally.
Yeah.
So I went hard for this one. It's 4 rounds of 20 shoulder press, 20 bent over rows, 20 deadlifts, 20 squats, 4 times.
Yeah, that'll do it.
Yeah, that was I was doing it and I was like, I gotta get to the end of this. And then I was like, is this accessible to other people? And I was thinking about it and I was like, you know what? You could do this with other weights too. You don't have to do like...
Yeah, that's right. You can modify that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, that's great. Sorry, I could talk about this with you all night. And maybe we will at some point. But I want to make sure that I give you a chance to tell me and tell our listeners what it is, if anything, that you were working on now that you're excited about, anything coming up that you've got that you're really looking forward to, or something that somebody else is doing that you're really excited about.
Oh man, that's such a good question. I'll start with myself, and then as that progresses, I'm sure it'll like thread into other things.
Sure.
So right now, I'm really, for 2022, I'm really focusing on Asians Represent. I want to make sure that we bring on as many voices as we can. I want to make sure that we tackle topics. Now that we kind of have this baseline of going through hard conversations, I just want the conversations to keep pushing us to grow and do better. And I personally want my presence on that podcast to kind of continue to show my vulnerability and my growth as we go through. I think that's really, really important. My other goal for 2022 is also to appear on more actual plays and streams, just in general. I decided that kind of towards the end of last year, I said I really, really enjoy these. I decided I really, really like, working with these other professionals in this kind of space and discussing these kind of things like we had at the beginning of this recording. So that's it. I can't share anything right now, unfortunately, because I am currently having discussions with other groups. Sure. And, that's all in process. But, folks, if you did enjoy listening to me ramble and talk and make jokes, you can follow me on Twitter at DEEMSteve. That's DM Steve phonetically. And I will post as soon as I can about my stuff. You can guarantee it because I am easily excitable. So definitely follow me there and you can catch up with what I'm currently working on.
Okay. Watch this space. All right. And
yeah. So for plugs, so things that I really want to like shout out here. I mentioned Unbreakable Volume 1. That obviously got published. I think it got Electrum on Drive-Thru RPG, so that's really, really cool. Volume 2 should be coming out next year. No date right now, but Unbreakable Volume 2 is going to be good. I'm really excited about that one because Volume 1 really focused on more of the North America writers and artists and things like that, generally for logistics. But for this particular one, we got a whole bunch of writers and artists from overseas, which really, really cool. But man, is it a nightmare. I'm editing for that one and trying to schedule times to someone who's in South Asia. It can get spicy. But I gotta tell you, some of the content that I'm seeing already, it's mind blowing. I cannot wait for this to become available to the overall public because I think the writing there is just so unique and so special and important right now.
I am super excited for that as well. I can't wait to see what happens. Well, Steve, this has been an absolute delight. Thank you again for coming on. We will have to do this again, and hopefully someday the pandemic will be over, and I'll get to say hi to you in person, and that'll be terrific.
Yeah. We're gonna see each other at a con. We're gonna go find the hotel gym, and we're just gonna eat iron for a bunch.
For 30 minutes, an hour. It's gonna be great. We're gonna just crush it. Thank you so much. We'll link to all of the things that you mentioned and your social media and all that. Thanks for listening, everybody. Stay healthy, stay safe, and keep rolling them dice.
You never know if it could change your life. Take a chance, you're neither wrong or right. You never know if you don't roll them dice. You better roll them dice. You never know if it can change your life. Take a chance, you either wrong or right. You never know.